In the cold, thin air high over Western Europe in the spring of 1943, a new shape appeared in the sky. It was monstrous, unlike any fighter the experienced pilots of the German Luftwaffe had ever seen. It was barrel-chested, brutish, and seemed impossibly large for a single-engine aircraft. They called it the Jabo, short for Jagdbomber or fighter bomber. But their initial radio chatter crackled with derision. To the aces of Jagdgeschwader 2 and 26, men who had honed their deadly craft against Spitfires and Hurricanes, this new American creation, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, was a flying joke. They mocked its clumsy appearance, nicknaming it the Fliegender Milchkrug, the flying milk bottle. It was, they believed, a fat, slow, and unmaneuverable target, a testament to a naive American belief that brute force could triumph over tactical finesse. They laughed, confident that this 7-ton behemoth would be easy prey for their nimble Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s. That laughter would soon die in their throats, replaced by the terrifying roar of 850 caliber machine guns and the shocking realization that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is not just the story of an aircraft, it is a story of industrial might, engineering genius, and the brutal learning curve of aerial warfare. It is the tale of how a fighter, born of a radical design philosophy and initially despised by its own pilots, became one of the most destructive and respected weapons of the Second World War. As we delve into the incredible evolution of this aerial titan, from its troubled beginnings to its ultimate triumph, take a moment to subscribe so you won't miss a single detail of how this ugly duckling became the Luftwaffe's most feared predator. The journey begins not in the skies over Europe, but on the drawing boards of a visionary Georgian immigrant in Farmingdale, New York. The mind behind the Thunderbolt belonged to Alexander Kartveli, a brilliant aeronautical engineer who had fled the Bolshevik Revolution to make his mark in the United States. As the chief designer for the Republic Aviation Corporation, Kartveli was a proponent of a distinct school of thought in fighter design. While European designers, particularly the British and Germans, prized lightweight construction, agility, and maneuverability, Kartveli believed in power, speed, and survivability. He envisioned a fighter that could absorb tremendous punishment and still bring its pilot home. A machine built around the most powerful engine available and armed to the teeth. His previous creation, the P-43 Lancer, had been a step in this direction, but it was underpowered and lacked the high-altitude performance demanded by the evolving nature of the air war. In 1940, with war already raging in Europe, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a daunting set of requirements for a new interceptor. They needed a plane that could reach 400 miles per hour, operate above 30,000 feet, and carry a heavy armament. The lessons from the Battle of Britain were clear. Future air combat would be fought at high altitudes, where bombers flew, and victory would belong to the fighters that could dominate that unforgiving environment. Kartveli's initial proposal, the AP-10, was a lightweight concept powered by a liquid-cooled Allison engine. But as reports flooded in from Europe about the performance of the latest German fighters, he knew it wasn't enough. In a bold move, he scrapped the AP-10 design and started fresh, this time building his concept around the most powerful piston engine in the world, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. This engine was an 18-cylinder, air-cooled radial behemoth capable of producing an astounding 2,000 horsepower. It was a marvel of engineering, but it was also massive and heavy, typically used to power medium bombers and naval aircraft, not nimble fighters. To build a single-seat fighter around it was considered by many to be madness. But Kartveli saw not a problem, but an opportunity. The R-2800 was the key to achieving the speed and altitude the Air Corps demanded. The challenge was how to package it into a functional airframe. The second crucial component of Kartveli's vision was the turbo supercharger. To maintain its power in the thin air of high altitudes, the R-2800 needed to be force-fed compressed air. A conventional gear-driven supercharger was insufficient. The solution was a complex General Electric turbo supercharger, a device that used the engine's hot exhaust gases to spin a turbine at incredible speeds, which in turn drove a centrifugal compressor to cram air into the engine. The problem was its size. The turbo unit was a bulky piece of equipment that had to be placed in the rear of the fuselage for balance and heat management. This led to one of the P-47's most defining and unconventional features: an intricate and lengthy network of ductwork. A massive air intake in the nose, below the engine, swallowed air which was then ducted back under the cockpit to the turbo in the rear fuselage. After being compressed and heated, this air then had to travel all the way back to the front of the plane to be fed into the engine's carburetor. The hot exhaust gases themselves were channeled from the engine back to the turbine through two large pipes running along the sides of the cockpit. This complex plumbing gave the P-47 its characteristic deep, barrel-shaped fuselage. It was a design dictated by pure engineering necessity, a brute force solution to a complex problem. The cockpit was placed high, giving the pilot an excellent view, perched atop this labyrinth of pipes and machinery. The result of this design was an aircraft of unprecedented size and weight for a single-engine fighter. The prototype, the XP-47B, first flew on May 6, 1941. It weighed over 12,000 pounds, nearly twice as much as a Spitfire. Its wingspan was over 40 feet. When Republic test pilot Lowry Brabham took it up for the first time, he was astounded. The plane was a rocket. It climbed at a phenomenal rate and, in level flight, easily surpassed 400 miles per hour, a stunning achievement for the time. But it was not without its problems. The forces on the control surfaces at high speed were immense. The cockpit canopy had a tendency to jam, and the sheer power of the engine and propeller combination created tremendous torque. The initial test flights were fraught with danger, including fires and control failures. Yet, the potential was undeniable. The XP-47B was a radical departure from conventional fighter design, a gamble that prioritized raw power and high-altitude performance above all else. The Army Air Forces, desperate for a long-range, high-altitude escort fighter to protect its heavy bombers, saw that potential and placed a massive order. The Jug, as it was affectionately nicknamed by its pilots, short for Juggernaut, was going to war. The first operational P-47s began arriving in England in late 1942, assigned to the 8th Air Force's 4th, 56th, and 78th Fighter Groups. The initial reception from the American pilots, many of whom were accustomed to flying the nimble Spitfire with the Royal Air Force's Eagle squadrons, was one of profound disappointment and distrust. They looked at the massive Thunderbolt and saw everything a fighter shouldn't be. It was heavy, it had a poor rate of climb at lower altitudes, and its roll rate was sluggish compared to the Spitfire or the FW-190. They joked that if you got into trouble, you could unstrap your seatbelt, open the canopy, and run around on the wing. The British, with their tradition of graceful, elliptical-winged fighters, were equally skeptical. One RAF pilot famously remarked that a P-47 pilot could take shelter from the rain under his own wing. The early months of 1943 were a frustrating and dangerous period of training and familiarization. The P-47's engine was prone to fouling, its guns had a tendency to jam, and its radio performance was abysmal. More worrying was its lack of range. With only its internal fuel tanks, the Thunderbolt could barely penetrate enemy territory before having to turn back, leaving the B-17 and B-24 bombers defenseless for the most dangerous parts of their missions. The first combat missions in April 1943 were a disaster. On April 15th, the 4th Fighter Group, on a sweep over the Belgian coast, was bounced by FW-190s from JG-26. The German pilots, led by aces, used their superior climb and roll rate to devastating effect. They dived on the unsuspecting Americans, made their firing passes, and then climbed away with impunity. The P-47s, unable to match the Focke-Wulfs in a turning or climbing fight, were left wallowing. 2 Thunderbolts were shot down for no German losses. It was a humiliating debut. The Luftwaffe pilots returned to their bases convinced that the new American fighter was a turkey. Their combat reports dismissed the P-47 as overweight and unmaneuverable, an easy kill for an experienced pilot. This initial assessment spread quickly throughout the German fighter arm, breeding a dangerous sense of overconfidence. They had seen the flying milk bottle in action, and they were not impressed. The American pilots were equally disheartened. They felt like they had been sent into combat in a flying truck, not a thoroughbred fighter. Morale plummeted. The commander of the 4th Fighter Group, Colonel Chesley Peterson, a veteran of the Eagle squadrons, was under immense pressure. Some in the 8th Air Force High Command were even considering withdrawing the P-47 from combat and replacing it with the P-51 Mustang, which was then just beginning to show its promise. But a few key figures refused to give up on the Thunderbolt. Among them was Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, the brilliant and demanding commander of the 56th Fighter Group, the Wolfpack. Zemke was a stern disciplinarian and a master tactician. He recognized the P-47's weaknesses, but he also saw its unique strengths. He drilled his pilots relentlessly, forcing them to understand that they could not fight the German fighters on their terms. Dogfighting was suicide. The P-47's advantages lay elsewhere. Its primary asset was its incredible speed in a dive. Thanks to its immense weight and clean aerodynamic design, once a P-47 pilot pointed its nose down, it accelerated like a freight train. Nothing the Germans had, not the FW-190 nor the Bf-109, could catch it. Zemke and other leaders like him developed new tactics centered around this principle. They taught their pilots to use dive and zoom, or boom and extend tactics. They would maintain a high altitude, using the Thunderbolt's excellent high-altitude performance to their advantage, and then dive on enemy formations, make a single devastating firing pass, and then use their superior speed to escape, climbing back up to regain their energy advantage. The second, and perhaps most important asset of the P-47 was its astonishing ruggedness. Alexander Kartveli had built a tank. The massive radial engine acted as a de facto armored shield for the pilot, capable of absorbing an incredible amount of damage. The airframe was immensely strong, and the complex ductwork, initially seen as a vulnerability, often absorbed shells and shrapnel without affecting the plane's primary structures. Pilots began returning to base in aircraft that looked like they had been through a shredder. Robert S. Johnson, who would go on to become one of the top aces of the 56th Fighter Group, famously returned from one mission with over 200 bullet and cannon shell holes in his P-47, Lucky. The tail was shredded, the canopy was shattered, and hydraulic fluid was pouring from dozens of leaks. But the engine kept running, and the plane brought him home. Stories like this became commonplace. German pilots, accustomed to seeing their cannon shells tear apart Spitfires, were shocked to see the P-47s absorb hit after hit and simply fly away. And then there was the firepower. The Thunderbolt carried 8 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 4 in each wing. This was an unprecedented concentration of firepower for a fighter aircraft. Each gun fired at a rate of approximately 800 rounds per minute, meaning a P-47 could spew out over 100 rounds per second. The total ammunition load was a staggering 3,400 rounds. A 2 or 3 second burst would send a dense wall of lead and steel into an enemy aircraft. The 50 caliber round was a devastating weapon. It combined high velocity with a heavy projectile that could tear through the light aluminum skin of a German fighter, shatter canopies, ignite fuel tanks, and obliterate engines. While the Germans favored cannons, which fired explosive shells, their low rate of fire and limited ammunition required precise aim. The P-47's 8 machine guns created a veritable shotgun blast. American pilots didn't need to be perfect marksmen. They simply had to get the enemy in their sights for a brief moment, and the sheer volume of fire would do the rest. The turning point came in the summer of 1943. As the American pilots mastered the new energy fighting tactics and grew more confident in their machines, the kill-to-loss ratios began to shift. On June 26, the 56th Fighter Group engaged a large formation of German fighters, and using Zemke's tactics to perfection, they shot down 8 enemy aircraft without losing a single P-47. The tide was beginning to turn. The Germans, still clinging to their initial assessment, were caught off guard. They would dive on the Thunderbolts, expecting them to be easy targets, only to find the American fighters suddenly plunging into a high-speed dive they could not follow. Or they would find themselves on the receiving end of a surprise attack from above. A fleeting glimpse of a barrel-chested fighter followed by a torrent of 50 caliber rounds that ripped their aircraft apart. The development of external drop tanks was another crucial step. These disposable fuel tanks, fitted under the wings or fuselage, finally gave the P-47 the range it desperately needed. By late 1943, Thunderbolts were able to escort the B-17s and B-24s all the way to their targets deep inside Germany and back again. The bomber crews, who had been suffering horrific losses, now had their little friends with them for the entire journey. The presence of the P-47s dramatically changed the tactical situation. German fighter pilots could no longer attack the bomber streams with impunity. They now had to fight their way through a screen of heavily armed and increasingly aggressive American fighters. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was profound. The laughter of the spring had turned into grim respect, and then to fear. German pilots began to specifically report encounters with the Rundkopf, roundhead fighters. They learned to dread the sight of the P-47s lurking high above in the sun. They knew they could not outdive it, and they knew their aircraft could not withstand its firepower. An experienced German ace, if he got the jump on a P-47 and managed to land a solid burst, could still score a victory. But any mistake, any hesitation, was fatal. The margin for error when fighting a Thunderbolt was razor thin. The flying milk bottle had begun its transformation. It was no longer a joke. It was a killer, a juggernaut that was just beginning to unleash its full potential on the Third Reich. The American pilots, who had once cursed their oversized mounts, now swore by them. They patted the thick fuselages of their jugs after a mission, marveling at the punishment they could absorb. They had come to understand that Kartveli's philosophy of power, speed, and survivability was not just a valid approach to fighter design. In the brutal skies over Germany, it was a winning one. The stage was set for the P-47 to achieve true dominance, a process that would be accelerated by new technological advancements, and a shift in strategy that would unleash the Thunderbolt not just as a high-altitude escort, but as a terrifying predator at treetop level. As 1944 dawned over a war-torn Europe, the skies were a far more dangerous place for the pilots of the Luftwaffe. The derisive laughter that had once echoed in their headsets at the sight of the P-47 Thunderbolt had long since faded, replaced by a grim and grudging respect. The flying milk bottle had proven it could fight, that it could absorb punishment that would shred lesser aircraft, and that its 8 heavy machine guns could turn a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf into a cloud of flaming debris in a matter of seconds. American pilots, now masters of energy-fighting tactics, were using the Thunderbolt's phenomenal diving speed and high-altitude performance to rack up an impressive tally of victories. But the P-47's transformation was far from complete. A series of crucial technological upgrades and a radical shift in strategic doctrine were about to elevate the Jug from a capable high-altitude escort to the single most destructive American weapon in the European theater, a versatile predator that would instill a unique and paralyzing terror in the hearts of the German ground forces. The era of the Jabo Schreck, the Jabo Terror, was about to begin. The first major evolution came not from a more powerful engine or a new weapon, but from a seemingly simple change: the propeller. The early models of the P-47, the P-47C, and early D models were fitted with a Curtiss electric propeller with a diameter of 12 feet. While effective at high speed, it lacked the blade area to efficiently convert the R-2800 engine's immense horsepower into thrust at lower speeds and altitudes. This was the primary reason for the Thunderbolt's initially sluggish rate of climb, a weakness that German pilots had ruthlessly exploited. The solution, introduced in mid-1943 and becoming widespread by 1944, was the adoption of new wide-chord paddle blade propellers, most notably a new Hamilton Standard Hydromatic and a larger 13-foot Curtiss electric version. These new propellers featured blades that were significantly wider, allowing them to bite into a much greater volume of air with each revolution. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The P-47's rate of climb improved by as much as 1,000 feet per minute. Its acceleration, a critical factor in a swirling dogfight, was noticeably enhanced. A Thunderbolt pilot could now hold his own against an FW-190 in a climbing fight, a scenario that would have been suicidal just a year earlier. This single improvement fundamentally altered the tactical equation. The P-47 was no longer a one-trick pony that relied solely on its diving speed. It was becoming a more well-rounded and formidable dogfighter at all altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots who encountered these newer P-47s were in for a nasty shock. an FW-190 pilot, attempting to escape an attacking Thunderbolt by pulling into a steep climb, would suddenly find that the lumbering jug was not falling away as expected, but was staying right with him, its nose inching ever closer, the 8 dark muzzles in its wings ready to unleash their devastating firepower. Another significant improvement was the introduction of the bubble, or teardrop canopy. Early P-47s had a high razorback fuselage spine behind the cockpit, which created a significant blind spot to the rear. This was a dangerous vulnerability that enemy fighters could exploit to sneak up undetected. Inspired by the British Hawker Typhoon, Republic engineers redesigned the upper fuselage, cutting it down and fitting a large, frameless plexiglass canopy that gave the pilot a full 360-degree view. The first P-47D model with a bubble canopy rolled off the production line in May 1944, and it quickly became the standard. This seemingly minor change had a major impact on situational awareness and pilot confidence, allowing American flyers to more effectively track enemy movements and protect their own tails. With these improved aircraft, the aces of the 8th Air Force continued their deadly work. The 56th Fighter Group, Zemke Wolfpack, remained the premier P-47 unit, and its pilots became legends. Francis Gabi Gabreski, a Polish-American pilot, honed his skills to a razor's edge, becoming the top-scoring American ace in the European theater with 28 aerial victories before being shot down and captured in July 1944. Robert S. Johnson, the man whose P-47 survived over 200 hits, finished his tour with 27 confirmed kills. Their commander, Hub Zemke, was himself a formidable ace with over 17 victories. These men, and hundreds like them, demonstrated what the Thunderbolt could do in the hands of a skilled and aggressive pilot. They flew with a swaggering confidence born of the knowledge that their aircraft could outdive, outgun, and outlast anything the Luftwaffe could put in the air. However, the strategic landscape of the air war was changing. In late 1943, the North American P-51 Mustang began to arrive in theater. With its revolutionary Merlin engine and superb aerodynamic design, the Mustang possessed the one thing the P-47 still lacked: truly long range. The P-51 could fly to Berlin and beyond, providing seamless escort for the bomber fleets on their deepest penetration missions. By the spring of 1944, the Mustang had taken over as the 8th Air Force's primary long-range escort fighter. For any other aircraft, this might have signaled a slide into obsolescence. For the P-47 Thunderbolt, it was a liberation. Freed from the strictures of high-altitude escort duty, the mighty Jug was about to be unleashed in the role for which it was perfectly, brutally suited: ground attack. The 9th Air Force, the tactical air arm of the U.S. forces in Europe, began to equip its fighter groups with P-47s in massive numbers. Their mission was not to fight at 30,000 feet, but to sweep across the fields, forests, and roadways of occupied France at treetop level, to destroy the German war machine on the ground before it could ever reach the front lines. The very qualities that made the P-47 a less-than-ideal dogfighter at low altitude made it a superlative ground attack platform. Its immense weight and stability made it a steady gun platform. Its incredible ruggedness allowed it to absorb the intense ground fire that was a constant hazard of low-level work. A single rifle bullet in the right place could bring down a liquid-cooled P-51 or Spitfire by puncturing its delicate cooling system, but the P-47's massive air-cooled radial engine could sustain significant damage and keep running. and its firepower was simply overwhelming. The 850 caliber machine guns, already proven to be devastating against aircraft, were equally effective against soft-skinned trucks, staff cars, and troop concentrations. But the Thunderbolt's ground attack arsenal was expanded even further. It was fitted with bomb racks capable of carrying 2 500-pound bombs, and later 2 1,000-pound bombs, a bomb load equal to that of a light bomber from just a few years earlier. It could also carry clusters of fragmentation bombs, or napalm. Later in 1944, it was equipped to fire a terrifying new weapon, the 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rocket, or HVAR. A P-47 carrying a full load of 10 HVARs could deliver a salvo with the destructive power of a naval destroyer's broadside. In the months leading up to the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, the P-47s of the 9th Air Force launched a systematic and relentless campaign to isolate the Normandy battlefield. Day after day, swarms of Thunderbolts, flying in formations of 4, 12, or even 50, roared across the French countryside at low altitude. They were a terrifying sight and sound. The deep, throaty roar of the R-2800 engine, so different from the higher-pitched whine of a Merlin or a Daimler-Benz, became an unmistakable harbinger of destruction. They targeted the lifelines of the German army, the railways. A favorite tactic was to have one flight of P-47 strafe and destroy the locomotive, bringing the train to a screeching halt. Then, the following flights would make pass after pass, methodically destroying every single railway car with bombs, rockets, and machine gun fire. They blew up bridges, cratered marshalling yards, and strafed anything that moved on the roads. For the German soldiers on the ground, the experience was a living nightmare. The term Jabo Schreck entered their vocabulary. The sudden, savage appearance of the Thunderbolts from over a tree line or hill induced a unique form of panic. There was often no warning, just the rapidly escalating roar of an engine, followed by the terrifying sound of the 50 caliber guns, a noise one German veteran described as like a giant tearing a massive sheet of linen. Soldiers would dive for any available cover, into ditches, under vehicles, anywhere to escape the hail of steel. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. It created a sense of utter helplessness, the feeling that they were being hunted, that nowhere was safe. German commanders found it increasingly impossible to move troops or supplies during daylight hours. Any road convoy, any troop train, was liable to be spotted and annihilated within minutes. After D-Day, the P-47s maintained a constant armed reconnaissance over the battlefield. They acted as the eyes and ears of the advancing Allied armies, and as their flying artillery. A forward air controller on the ground with an armored column could spot a German Tiger tank dug in behind a hedgerow, and within minutes, a flight of P-47s would be on the scene. The pilots would roll in one by one, their rockets streaking towards the target, their bombs leaving plumes of black smoke and earth. The Thunderbolt's ability to loiter over the battlefield, absorb punishment from anti-aircraft fire, and deliver precise, heavy ordnance on demand was instrumental in breaking up German counterattacks and paving the way for the Allied breakout from Normandy. The statistics of the P-47's destructive power are staggering. By the end of the war in Europe, Thunderbolt pilots were credited with destroying 3,752 enemy aircraft in the air and another 3,315 on the ground. But the ground attack numbers tell the real story of its impact. P-47s were credited with the destruction of 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 68,000 trucks, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles and tanks, and 600 bridges. These numbers represent the systematic strangulation of the German war effort. The P-47, the aircraft once mocked as a clumsy giant, was bleeding the Wehrmacht to death, severing its logistical arteries and paralyzing its ability to fight. Adolf Galland, the renowned German general of fighter forces, stated after the war that the Allied fighter-bombers had been the most decisive factor in Germany's defeat. When he spoke of fighter-bombers, he was speaking primarily of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Even as the war neared its end, the P-47 continued to evolve and face new challenges. In the skies over Germany, it encountered the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. In a straight and level race, the Thunderbolt stood no chance against the futuristic jet. But the American pilots, ever adaptable, developed tactics to counter the new threat. They knew the Me-262 was most vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when it was moving slowly and its jet engines were slow to respond. P-47 groups would patrol at high altitude near known jet airbases, waiting for the 262s to return. Then, they would dive down in a deadly high-speed pass, catching the jets with their landing gear down. Helpless. On several occasions, P-47 pilots in a full-power dive managed to close on an Me-262 and shoot it down in a conventional engagement, a testament to the Thunderbolt's incredible speed once it had an altitude advantage. The final variants of the Thunderbolt, the P-47M and P-47N, pushed the design to its absolute limits. The P-47M was a high-speed interceptor, fitted with a more powerful engine with water injection that could produce nearly 2,800 horsepower for short periods. It was one of the fastest piston-engine fighters of the war, specifically designed to chase down German V-1 flying bombs. The P-47N was the ultimate long-range version, built for the vast distances of the Pacific Theater. With redesigned wings that carried more fuel, the P-47N had a combat radius of over 1,000 miles. These long-range jugs were used to escort B-29 superfortresses on their bombing raids against the Japanese home islands, a mission that demanded endurance and reliability, qualities the Thunderbolt had in abundance. The story of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt is a perfect embodiment of the American approach to warfare in the mid-20th century. It was not the most elegant, the most nimble, or the most technologically advanced fighter of its time. It was, instead, a product of industrial logic. It was designed around the biggest engine and the most guns. It was over-engineered for survivability. It was a heavy, rugged, and immensely powerful tool designed to do a brutal job effectively and to bring its operator home safely. It was mass-produced on an epic scale, with a total of 15,683 units built, more than any other American fighter aircraft in history. The German pilots who laughed at the first P-47s they saw in 1943 were not fools. They were judging the aircraft by their own standards of aerial combat, standards that prized maneuverability and finesse. They failed to understand that the Thunderbolt represented a different philosophy, one where survivability, firepower, and overwhelming numbers could triumph over tactical brilliance. They made the mistake of mocking the Juggernaut, and in the end, the Juggernaut rolled over them. From the cold, thin air of 30,000 feet to the mud and smoke of the battlefield, the P-47 proved to be one of the most important and effective aircraft of the Second World War. The flying milk bottle had become a legend, its name forever etched in history not with laughter, but with the thunder of its engine and the devastating rain of its 850 caliber guns. For more deep dives into the legendary machines and pivotal moments of history, be sure to subscribe to our channel.